The first thing my son said when I called about his wedding was, "Mom, I need you to understand something. You're not invited." I remember standing in my kitchen with one hand around a cup of coffee, staring at the wedding invitation lying unopened on the counter. There wasn't actually an invitation inside. There never had been. For 3 weeks, I had been telling myself it was simply delayed. Maybe the venue had changed. Maybe they were sending invitations in batches. Maybe Daniel was busy with work and had forgotten to mail mine. He was my only son. I had raised him alone after his father walked out when Daniel was 6. I had worked double shifts, packed his lunches, sat beside him through fevers, paid his college tuition one semester at a time, and once sold my wedding ring because he needed money for his first apartment. So when he told me I wouldn't be standing beside him on the most important day of his life, I couldn't understand what I had done to deserve it. "Is this because of something Emma said?" I asked. There was a long silence. Then Daniel sighed, "Just don't come, Mom, please." That was when I realized this wasn't an invitation problem. It was something else, something he was afraid to tell me. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table until the coffee went cold. 2 days later, I almost convinced myself to accept his decision. Then, on the morning of the wedding, someone knocked on my door. It was a woman I had never met. She was elegant, probably in her late 50s, wearing a deep blue dress and holding a small black purse against her chest. "I'm Margaret," she said quietly, "Emma's mother." My heart began pounding. She looked past me into the house, then back at my face. "I know Daniel told you not to come," I nodded. Margaret stepped closer, and I know why. I couldn't breathe. She reached into her purse, pulled out an old photograph, and held it between us. "Your son has been hiding something from you," she whispered. Then she looked toward the street. "We don't have much time. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. I stared at the photograph. And when I saw the person standing beside my son in it, I understood why Daniel had been so desperate to keep me away from his wedding. For the next 3 weeks, I told everyone the same thing. Daniel's wedding invitation must have been delayed. I said it with a smile whenever someone asked about the wedding, even though there was a small ache in my chest every time his name came up. The truth was, I had been waiting for that invitation since the day he told me he was getting married. I had imagined opening the envelope at my kitchen table, seeing his handwriting on the front, and probably crying before I even read the words. Instead, nothing came. At first, I wasn't worried. Daniel had always been terrible with dates, paperwork, and anything involving postage. So I called him. "Mom, we're still working out the final guest list," he told me. There was something strange about his voice, not anger, not sadness, something closer to discomfort. "Oh, that's fine," I said quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. "I just wanted to make sure you had my new address." "I have it." Then he changed the subject. A week later, I called again. This time, he didn't answer. I left a message. He never called back. That was when I began wondering whether Emma had something to do with it. I'd only met Emma 3 times. She was polite, beautiful, and always seemed careful around me. Not rude, just guarded. During our last dinner together, I remember watching her reach across the table and take Daniel's hand. He smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I wanted to be happy for them. I truly did. So I pushed my doubts aside. Then, 5 days before the wedding, Daniel finally called. His first words were not hello. "Mom, I need you to do me a favor." I felt my stomach tighten. "Of course, sweetheart, don't come to the wedding." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. "What? Please don't make this harder than it already is." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Daniel, I'm your mother." "I know, and you're getting married." "I know that too." His voice became quieter. "That's exactly why I'm asking you not to come." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. I asked if Emma was angry with me. He said no. I asked if I had offended her family. He said no. Finally, I asked the only question left. "Then why don't you want me there?" There was silence on the other end. And then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life, because some things are better left in the past, Mom. The call ended before I could ask what he meant. That night, I placed the childhood photograph of Daniel beside the empty space where his wedding invitation should have been. For the first time, I wondered if the past he was talking about was something I had forgotten, or something he had never known. And somewhere across town, my son was preparing to marry the woman he loved while making absolutely certain his mother would not be there to witness it. The morning of the wedding arrived before I had decided what to do with myself. I woke before sunrise, as I often did, and for a few seconds I forgot what day it was. Then I saw the empty chair across from my bed, where I had left Daniel's childhood photograph the night before. The memory came rushing back. My son was getting married, and I was not supposed to be there. I made coffee I didn't want and stood by the kitchen window watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. Cars pulled out of driveways. A delivery truck stopped at the corner. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started. It was an ordinary morning that somehow made everything hurt worse. I kept asking myself what I had done. Mothers make mistakes. I knew that better than anyone. Maybe I'd been too protective. Maybe I had said something about Emma that Daniel hadn't forgiven. Maybe I had embarrassed him in front of her family. But no matter how many possibilities I considered, none of them explained the fear I had heard in his voice. Daniel wasn't simply angry with me, he sounded frightened. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Mom. His voice was tense. I've been thinking about yesterday, so have I. He exhaled slowly. I need you to promise me something. What? You won't come to the hotel. My heart sank. I wasn't planning to. You promise? Yes. There was another silence. Then I asked, Daniel, what happened to us? He didn't answer. I could hear voices in the background. Someone laughed. A door closed. Then a woman said something I couldn't make out. Daniel immediately lowered his voice. Mom, please trust me. Trust you with what? You'll understand someday. I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt more than anything else he could have said. You're my son, I whispered. If something is wrong, you can tell me. I can't. Why? Because if you know, you'll try to fix it. They almost laughed through my tears. That was exactly what mothers did. We tried to fix things. We stayed awake when everyone else slept. We carried burdens our children didn't even know they were carrying. But this time, my son didn't want me to carry his. He wanted me to disappear from it. Daniel, I said softly, I will respect your wishes. He sounded relieved. Thank you. Before he hung up, I heard him say something that stopped me cold. She can't find out before the ceremony. I froze. Who can't find out? He didn't respond. Daniel? The call ended. I stood there with the phone pressed against my ear. My first thought was Emma. My second was that he was talking about me. But then another possibility entered my mind. Someone else knew a secret. Someone Daniel was desperately trying to protect. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the clock. 9:15. The ceremony would begin in less than 3 hours. I had promised my son I wouldn't go, and I intended to keep that promise, until someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, a woman in a blue dress was standing on my porch. She looked directly into my eyes. My name is Margaret, she said. I'm Emma's mother. Then she lowered her voice. And I think you deserve to know why your son doesn't want you at his wedding. I stared at the woman standing on my porch, trying to understand why the mother of my son's bride had come to my house on the morning of her daughter's wedding. Margaret didn't look angry. She looked worried. That frightened me more. I don't understand, I said. You weren't supposed to meet me like this. Her eyes moved toward the street before she stepped inside. She carried a small black purse against her side, and her blue dress looked far too formal for an unexpected morning visit. I know Daniel asked you not to come, she said. Yes. He asked you not to come because he is afraid of what might happen if you do. My throat tightened. Afraid of me? No, she shook her head. Afraid of the truth. I didn't know what to say. Margaret looked around my living room and stopped when she noticed the framed photograph of Daniel on the bookshelf. He was 17 in that picture, standing beside me after his high school graduation. His smile was so wide that I could almost hear his younger voice calling me Mom. Margaret studied the photograph for several seconds. Then she looked back at me. He looks exactly like his father. I felt something inside me go still. Did you know my husband? No. Her answer came too quickly. I mean, I knew of him, she said. Daniel's father left when Daniel was 6. I know. Those 2 words landed harder than they should have, you know? Margaret sat down slowly. Yes. I remained standing. How? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, she looked like someone trying to decide how much damage the truth could cause. Finally, she said, Because Emma and I have known about your family for much longer than you realize. My hands began to tremble. What does Emma know? Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and touched something inside. Before I show you this, you need to promise me something. What? You won't leave. I almost smiled. I've spent my whole morning being told where I am not allowed to go. Margaret's expression softened. This isn't about the wedding anymore. She looked directly into my eyes. It's about what happened 27 years ago. I felt the room become strangely quiet. 27 years. That was the year Daniel was 6. The year his father disappeared. The year I thought my life had been torn in half. I took a slow breath. What happened 27 years ago? Margaret looked down at her purse, then back at me. That's what I came here to tell you. Outside, a car horn sounded. Margaret glanced at the clock. We have less than an hour before the ceremony. She stood and held the purse tightly against her chest. And there is something in here that Daniel never wanted you to see. For the first time that morning, I understood that the wedding was not the beginning of this story. It was the place where an old secret had finally come back to collect its debt. Margaret sat across from me at the kitchen table, her blue dress bright against the faded curtains I had washed only the night before. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me and the clock above the stove ticking louder than it ever had before. Finally, Margaret placed her black purse on the table. I need you to understand something before I show you what is inside. I nodded. Emma doesn't know everything. That surprised me. I thought you said she knew about my family. She knows enough to be afraid. Afraid of what? Margaret looked toward the window. Of losing Daniel. My heart sank. Is that why she doesn't want me at the wedding? No. She turned back toward me. Emma wanted you there. I stared at her. What? She argued with Daniel about it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then why did he tell me not to come? Because Daniel believes that if you see the evidence before the ceremony, you will demand answers immediately. He thinks the truth will explode before he can protect everyone involved. What truth? Margaret opened her purse but didn't remove anything yet. 27 years ago, your husband didn't simply leave your family. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I know he left. No, she said gently. You know what you were told? Those words made my chest tighten. I remembered that terrible morning as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Daniel was 6 years old. His father had promised to take him fishing that Saturday. Instead, I woke to an empty side of the bed and a note on the kitchen counter. He was gone, no explanation, no goodbye. Nothing except a few lines saying that he needed a different life. I had spent years believing those words. Margaret watched my face. Did he ever contact you again? No. Did you ever wonder why? Every single day. She lowered her eyes. My husband knew him. I stared at her. Your husband? Yes. Who? Robert. A cold feeling moved through me. Robert knew my husband. They worked with him. And he knew Thomas too. Thomas, your husband's closest friend. The names were suddenly beginning to form a chain I wished I had never discovered. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the people who knew what happened thought keeping silent would protect you and Daniel. Protect us from what? Margaret finally opened the purse. Before she could reach inside, her phone began ringing. She glanced at the screen and her face changed. It's Emma, she answered. Sweetheart? There was a long pause. Then Margaret's expression became pale. What do you mean he's gone? I stood immediately. Who is gone? Margaret looked at me. Her eyes were filled with fear. Daniel. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. Emma says Daniel left the hotel 20 minutes ago. I felt the room tilt beneath me. Margaret slowly pulled an old photograph from her purse. This is why he ran. I looked down and recognized the man standing beside my husband. It was someone I had trusted with my entire family. I picked up the photograph with both hands because suddenly I was afraid of what it might tell me. The picture was old, slightly faded around the edges, but the faces were clear enough. My husband was standing on the left. He looked younger than I remembered him, maybe 30 years old, wearing the brown jacket I had given him for Christmas. Beside him stood another man, a man I recognized immediately. My hands began to shake. Thomas, I whispered. Margaret nodded. You know him. Of course I know him. Thomas had been my husband's closest friend. He had come to our house for birthdays, holidays, even Daniel's 6th birthday party. After my husband disappeared, Thomas had stopped visiting. I had always assumed he simply didn't know how to face me, but now I understood there had been more to it. Why is Thomas in this picture? Margaret looked at me carefully. This was taken 2 days before your husband disappeared. My eyes returned to the photograph. 2 days. I remembered that week. I remembered my husband acting strangely at dinner. I remembered him taking phone calls outside. I remembered asking whether something was wrong, and I remembered him telling me I worried too much. What does Thomas have to do with Daniel? Margaret hesitated. Everything. The word barely left her mouth before my phone began ringing. Daniel. I stared at the screen. Margaret told me not to answer. I did anyway. Daniel, where are you? There was no response, only breathing. Then I heard his voice. Mom. My heart broke at the sound of it. Please listen to me. I'm listening. I didn't want you to find out this way. Find out what? He was silent. Then he said, Margaret shouldn't have come to you. Why? Because once you know, everything changes. I looked at the photograph again. Daniel, what happened to your father? His breathing stopped. For several seconds there was nothing. Then he whispered the words I had spent 27 years wishing someone would say. He didn't leave us. I couldn't move. What did you say? He didn't leave us, Mom. My knees weakened. I reached for the chair beside me. Then where did he go? Daniel's voice cracked. I don't know. You don't know? I only found out about him 6 months ago. Margaret suddenly stood. Daniel, you need to tell her everything. He said nothing. Then I heard another voice in the background, a man's voice, older, familiar. And when that man said my name, the photograph slipped from my fingers. Because I knew that voice, it belonged to Thomas. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. Thomas's voice was still echoing in my mind, bringing back memories I had buried so deeply that I had almost convinced myself they no longer mattered. Daniel was breathing heavily on the phone. Mom, are you still there? Yes. My voice barely sounded like mine. Is Thomas with you? No. Then where is he? I looked at Margaret. She was staring at me with tears in her eyes. He's at the hotel, Daniel said. What hotel? The wedding hotel. My heart began pounding. Why is Thomas at your wedding? Daniel didn't answer. Daniel, why is Thomas at your wedding? Finally he whispered, because he knows what happened to Dad. I closed my eyes. For 27 years, I had believed my husband's disappearance was something I would never understand. Now, on the morning of my son's wedding, pieces of that lost life were appearing one after another. What did you find out 6 months ago? Daniel took a shaky breath. I found an old storage box. Where? In Grandpa's house? His grandfather had died years earlier, and after his funeral, most of his belongings had been divided between relatives. Daniel had never mentioned finding anything unusual. What was inside? Letters. My heart tightened. Letters from your father? Yes. How many? 4. Margaret sat down slowly. Daniel continued. He wrote them to you. I couldn't breathe. Why didn't I receive them? That is what I couldn't understand. Then, why did you keep this from me? Because the letters were never sent. Why? Another silence. Then Daniel said something that made everything inside me go cold. Because someone intercepted them. I looked at Margaret. She knew. I could see it in her face. Who? Daniel's voice became quieter. I don't know for certain, but you suspect someone. Yes. Who? He hesitated. Thomas. The name hit me like a physical blow. No, Mom, listen to me. No, Daniel. Thomas was your father's friend, I know. He helped us after your father disappeared. I know. He came to your birthday parties. I know. Then why would he do this? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, I heard him whisper, because Dad discovered something about him. My hands went cold. What did he discover? Before Daniel could answer, someone knocked hard against my front door. Margaret stood immediately. We both looked toward the hallway. Another knock followed. Then a man's voice came through the door. Please let me in. I knew that voice. It was Thomas, and this time he wasn't calling me by my name. He was calling me Mom. I opened the door slowly. Thomas stood on the porch, looking nothing like the confident man I remembered from all those years ago. His face was pale, his gray hair was damp with sweat, and in his hands he held a small envelope that looked as old as the photograph Margaret had shown me. Why did you call me Mom? I asked. Thomas lowered his eyes because Daniel asked me to. My heart tightened. Where is my son? At the hotel. Then why are you here? He looked at Margaret. She nodded once. Thomas stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I should have told you the truth 27 years ago. I stared at him. What truth? He placed the envelope on my kitchen table. Your husband didn't leave you because he wanted another life. I already knew that much. But hearing it from Thomas made the room feel smaller. He was planning to leave town, Thomas continued, but not alone. My breathing stopped. With whom? With Daniel. I felt my knees weaken. Why would he take our son? He wasn't going to take him. Thomas swallowed. Was trying to protect him. Margaret sat beside me. What was he protecting him from? Thomas looked at me. Me. Silence filled the kitchen. I couldn't understand. You? Yes. He pulled out an old letter. Your husband discovered that I had been taking money from the company we both worked for. I stared at him. He found evidence and told me he was going to report it. What happened? Thomas's voice broke. I panicked. He admitted that he had followed my husband to a motel where they argued. My husband had threatened to expose him. Thomas had threatened him back. But according to Thomas, he never intended for anyone to get hurt. The next morning, your husband disappeared. And you knew where he went? No. Thomas shook his head. That was the truth I never told anyone. He had found the 4 letters months later. They had been written by my husband from a small town in another state. In them, my husband explained that he was alive and wanted to return, but he was afraid. Not of Thomas anymore, Margaret said quietly. Thomas nodded. He was afraid of someone else. Who? Thomas looked toward Margaret. Her husband. I turned toward her. She looked devastated. My husband had been working with your husband, she whispered. They both discovered what Thomas had done. I looked at the photograph again. Suddenly, every piece seemed connected. But one question remained. If my husband was alive, why didn't he come home? Thomas looked at me with tears in his eyes. Because Robert convinced him that you had chosen to move on. My voice trembled. How? He told your husband that after all those years you wanted nothing more to do with him. He told him Daniel deserved a father who had stayed. And then he made sure the letters never reached you. I stared at him. Robert did that? Thomas nodded. And you let him? His face crumpled. Yes, that one word hurt more than any excuse could have. Where is my husband now? Thomas lowered his eyes. We don't know. He reached into his coat and removed one final photograph. He placed it beside the first. I looked down and saw a younger version of myself standing outside a hospital. Beside me was Daniel, and behind us was a man I had never noticed, a man who had been watching us for years. I stared at the photograph until my eyes began to hurt. The man standing behind Daniel and me was older now, but I knew his face. I had seen him before, not at a wedding, not at a funeral, not in some distant memory. He'd been sitting in the hospital waiting room 27 years earlier, only a few chairs away from me. I had thought he was a stranger. He was there that day, I whispered. Thomas nodded. His name is Robert. Margaret covered her mouth. My husband. I looked at her. You knew? I suspected, she said, tears filling her eyes. But I didn't know everything. Robert had been working with my husband when the company discovered the missing money. Thomas had stolen it. Robert had helped hide the evidence. My husband found out. He threatened to expose both of them. That was when everything changed. Robert had approached me at the hospital after Daniel fell sick with pneumonia. He told me my husband had abandoned us. He told me there was another woman. He told me Daniel deserved a father who actually wanted him. I remembered those words. For 27 years, I had believed them. I had hated my husband for leaving. I had blamed myself for not being enough. And all that time, someone else had been controlling the story. What happened to my husband? I asked. Thomas looked down. Robert found him. My heart stopped. He found him? Yes. What did he do? He convinced your husband that you had moved on and wanted nothing more to do with him. That isn't true. I know. Then where is he now? Thomas hesitated. We don't know. Margaret began crying, but Daniel found something else. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter. This arrived 3 months ago. I opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. My husband's handwriting. The first line nearly broke me. I never stopped loving you. I couldn't read the rest. Tears blurred every word. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. Mom. His voice was different now. Not frightened, just tired. I'm coming home. I wiped my face. Where are you? Outside your house. I looked toward the window. A car had stopped at the curb. Daniel stepped out. He wasn't wearing his wedding suit anymore. He walked toward the door slowly. When he entered, he looked at me and began to cry. I should have told you months ago. I opened my arms. He came into them like the little boy he used to be. I didn't forgive everything that morning. He didn't ask me to. Instead, we sat together and faced the truth we had both been avoiding. The wedding could wait. The questions couldn't. Daniel told me that 6 months earlier, he had found the storage box containing the 4 unsent letters. 3 months later, the new letter arrived. He had contacted Margaret because Robert's involvement connected both families, and he had asked Thomas for the truth. He had delayed telling me because he feared that confronting the past immediately would destroy the wedding in place. Me in the middle of a family secret that had already hurt us for decades. But that morning, with the ceremony only minutes away, Daniel finally understood something. Keeping me outside the truth was not protecting me. It was repeating the same silence that had already stolen 27 years from our family. So, he left the hotel. Not because he had stopped loving Emma, because he could not stand at the altar and promise to build a family on top of a lie. The wedding was postponed. Emma was waiting for answers too. And for the first time in 27 years, my family was finally ready to stop protecting the lies and start searching for the truth. By the time the sun began to set, the house was quiet again. Daniel was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, holding the old photograph between his hands. The wedding had been postponed, not canceled forever. Just postponed until everyone understood what had happened and decided what kind of future they wanted to build from it. For the first time that day, I didn't feel angry about that. There are moments in life when you realize that reaching the destination isn't as important as understanding the road that brought you there. For 27 years, I had believed my husband had abandoned us. I had carried that belief through birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, and countless nights when I wondered what I had done wrong. I had taught myself to live with an unanswered question. But the truth had been waiting all along, not because it was easy to find, because too many people had been afraid of what would happen when it finally came into the light. Daniel looked at me that evening and apologized, not for postponing his wedding, for keeping me outside the truth. I told him something I wish I had understood years earlier. Being a family doesn't mean protecting each other from every painful truth. It means having the courage to face the truth together, he cried. So did I. Margaret came by before she left. She hugged me and apologized for the secrets her family had carried. I told her she didn't need to apologize for decisions she hadn't made. Then she smiled sadly. Maybe that's how families begin healing, she said. Someone finally decides not to continue the silence. I thought about that after she left. We often imagine betrayal as something loud, a slammed door, a cruel accusation, someone walking away, but sometimes betrayal is much quieter. It is a secret kept because someone thinks they are protecting you. It is a truth delayed until years have passed. It is a son believing his mother cannot handle the pain. And sometimes healing begins when someone finally sits down and says, "This is what really happened. I still don't know exactly where my husband is." That part of the story remains unfinished. But I know something now that I didn't know that morning. I was never abandoned because I wasn't worthy of being loved. And my son didn't keep me away because he stopped loving me. We were both simply standing on opposite sides of a secret someone else had built around us. Families are not perfect. They make mistakes. They hide things. They hurt one another. But the families worth saving are the ones willing to tell the truth when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. Because forgiveness cannot grow inside a lie. And love cannot heal what nobody is willing to face. Some families are connected by blood. Some are held together by memories. But the strongest families are built on something much harder to give, the truth. Thank you for spending this evening with me at Lantern House. If this story touched you, stay a while. There are many more by the fire.